Our top focus this evening, Gary Lineker is a footballing legend. He's also a commentator, an expert, and he hosts the match of the day on the BBC. Now, why are we talking about Gary Lineker? Gary Lineker has been taken off his commentary duties over what BBC claims. Match of the day, I beg your pardon, MOTD, as it's called on the BBC. He's a commentator on the show, a host, and he's been taken off for questioning the UK government's policy on accepting refugees and illegal immigrants. Now, believe it or not, the BBC, which preaches to the world, likes to preach to India about values of democracy, freedom of speech, big talk, has sacked him over a tweet. He's been booted out. There is huge protest across UK as many commentators, many greats of the game, legends, join him in saying they too will not be a part of this match of the day event in the UK. Now, that's where the story stands. What it's essentially done is expose the BBC's double standards. Hypocrites at BBC have just censored Gary Lineker. Let me go across on the show. We have two panelists. All right. Let me start with you, Savio. Savio and Aarti Tikku Singh joining us on the show this evening. Savio, we've been talking about the BBC, but unusual, coming from the BBC, facing criticism, and they haven't faced any criticism. It's the Home Secretary of the UK who's faced criticism. What do you make of what they've just done?
Well, to be honest, I think BBC has always been the voice of the UK government and has been the parrot of the UK government, to be more precise. So when it takes a stand against somebody like Gary Lineker, who's an icon in its own right, and he made an opinion, or he had an opinion, a political opinion to what a UK policy was all about, and for that he was removed or asked to step aside, it only goes to show that BBC is not the integral voice of the world that it portrayed itself to be. You know, it was doing a program on Prime Minister Modi which did not have the information of the Supreme Court judgment. It took its own pot shots at the Indian government to prove that the Indian government was responsible for a program that happened during the Godhra riots. So we know that BBC is primarily a news broadcasting agency with an agenda that is linked to the UK government, or an agenda that's linked to its advertisers and investors like China, as we realized in recent time when the MP Mahesh Jethmalani brought those facts out. So I think Gary Lineker's point of view, whether I agree with it or not, is irrelevant in this discussion. But what is sad is that BBC asked him to step aside. And what is very good is that other hosts, just like Gary Lineker, stood by him, saying that we will not attend the show, we will not be on match of the day, primarily because Gary Lineker took a stand. Now, Gary Lineker's comments on the UK policy was his personal opinion. That BBC had to target him to toe the line of the UK government is shameful. So that's bias, clearly. That's a clear bias stand of the BBC. So BBC should not go about trumpeting that they are high above every other media outlet in this world and can question India and question India's integrity as far as journalism ethics are going, because BBC does not have any journalism ethics.
Yeah. Aarti, both of you are journalists. Aarti, for some of us who've covered, the refugee crisis in the UK, and we know all the means that people use to get into the UK. They just want to get into the UK because they feel that once they get into the UK, life is taken care of. And essentially, for our viewers joining us on the show, Gary Lineker, he opposed the UK government policy, the announcement that was made. And let's show you the tweet that he put out. It's a simple tweet. He simply disagreed with the UK Home Secretary, who said, "Stop the boats." Now, what did the government of UK mean when they said stop the boats? They said we will not accept illegal immigrants. They said we will send you back from wherever you're coming in. If you're coming in, landing up on our shores and hoping for healthcare, hoping for food, hoping for shelter, hoping for UK to take care of you. In fact, the UK Home Secretary also says that the country, that is UK, spends about £7 million a day. £7 million a day, which is about roughly 70 crore a day to take care of these refugees. Now, he just said there is no huge influx. We take far fewer refugees than other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 1930s. And I'm out of order, question mark. Now, that was what he said in response to the UK government policy. Now, the government of UK is right in those who've been to UK, those who've covered the refugee crisis in UK know how bad the situation is. So whether they agree or disagree, that's not the point. The point is, simple tweet and the BBC just takes someone off for it, right? And all the vokes, you would have expected them in India, and all those people in the lobby in India, you would have expected them to come out and criticize the BBC, go after the BBC, but they're just not doing that today. Why are they not doing that today, Aarti?
Well, to begin with, BBC is a vestige. It's a vestige of the colonial legacy of the British Empire. So let's not have any illusions about BBC. Many in the world probably for a very long time thought that BBC is this great platform of, where every community, every nation got a voice, free and fair voice. That's not so. In fact, BBC, I would say, is a highly discredited platform, and their biases are getting exposed day in, day out. And today, once again, we have seen that their bias and the fact that they toe the line of the British government, no matter who comes to power. They will just toe the British line. And with respect to the rest of the world, they will actually take the same line that of the government. Whether it's on immigration policy, rightly or wrongly, they will take that line. And we also know that, from the colonial past that India has had and the experience we have had with the British establishment, we know that they are racist. We know that they have this superiority complex. They do believe in the supremacy of the British, and that gets reflected in the British approach to news media. That gets reflected in the kind of documentaries that they make, especially since Savi also mentioned this. The documentary made on Prime Minister Modi, it reflected the same colonial mindset that the British colonial masters had about Indians, about the native, uncouth, underprivileged, backward Indians. That's the kind of classist, racist attitude that got reflected in that documentary. Their visceral hatred for Prime Minister Modi speaks of their classist and racist view. And that, unfortunately, has a certain constituency in India. When you refer to these people who were endorsing and supporting BBC just a couple of weeks ago, they see themselves as the heirs of the British colonial masters. They see themselves as these English-speaking, cultured, highly civilized, with Cambridge, Oxford accent English in India. They see themselves as successors to the British colonial rulers. And that is why they came out in support of the BBC documentary against Prime Minister Modi, who comes from nowhere. He's a common Indian like me, like many others in this country, who do not come from any privileged background, who do not come from any patronage, who do not have the accent, Cambridge, Oxbridge accent, who does not have the kind of classist upbringing that the Lutyens Delhi intellectuals, so to say, have. And that is the reason, you see convergence of theory, convergence of narrative, convergence of rhetoric between BBC and the BBC supporters in India. That is the bond that brings them together. On all other issues, they may be on, on two different tangents altogether. But it's that classist, racist view against the native Indians, against people who do not have the luxury or do not have the privilege of being so British-like. Now, the point is that this, with respect to Gary Lineker, one can agree or disagree with his point of view. There is a refugee problem in Europe. You cannot undermine that. You cannot say that there is no refugee problem. There is a refugee problem. We also know that a lot of Pakistanis have infiltrated various institutions of United Kingdom, including media. In fact, this is not something that I'm making up. The UK government has themselves come out with their own reports which show that, a lot of their institutions have been infiltrated by Islamists, by radicals. And that reality is there. One does not deny that. But for a media institution to suspend or media institution to deplatform somebody who has a different point of view on immigration policy, it is absurd. It shows that, BBC, which lectures India on democracy, nowadays we hear this entire rhetoric from the US to the United Kingdom, or democracy in India is under threat because of the Modi government policies. But you see, this is where their own status of democracy is exposed. They do not believe in democratic point of view. They do not believe in a diverse point of view. So this shows that BBC is highly discredited. They do not really have today the voice of credibility. They do not have the audience. They do not really have a compassionate, an objective, a neutral point of view. They are the spokesperson, or you can say they are the governments. As it is, we know that they are a state broadcaster and they will always reflect the state's point of view. And that's what's happening here. We are just seeing how BBC, which had all this charade, there was this pretense of being a neutral platform. The mask is coming off. They are not a neutral media. They are the spokespersons of the United Kingdom government.
Ironically, I was just looking up the BBC website right now, and Savio and Aarti, while I thank you, I just want to read out this headline from the 12th of November 2015 on the BBC website. It says, believe it or not, this is an opinion about how writers, including Salman Rushdie, are urging David Cameron to challenge Indian Prime Minister over freedom of speech. There's an article from November 2015 when BBC was lecturing to India on freedom of speech. They claimed a climate of fear in India, and they propped up people like Salman Rushdie, Val McDermott and Ian McKeven, and how then Prime Minister David Cameron, BBC wanted David Cameron to raise issue of freedom of speech with India. What an irony. On that note, thank you Aarti and thank you Aarti and Savio for joining us on the biggest story tonight. Quick check of the other top stories we're tracking on Republic this evening. From National Capital to Hyderabad, BRS